we'll come back after last week. Merry Christmas. That's okay to say here, right? That's legal. I don't have to say happy holidays here, do I? It's politically correct. I hate that. All right. Hey, real quick, we filled out some survey cards about a third service, and there's more to come on that, but about 100, I think it was 168 cards were turned in that said you'd love a Saturday night service, you'd make it your service. Probably represents around 250 people if you count kiddos. And then another, I'm going to say 250 or so cards were filled out that said I'd try a Saturday night service and would maybe make it my service. So there was 400 or 500 total if you count kids that said that they would either make it their service or consider making it their service. So it seems like it's something we're going to work towards. I'll talk more about it. The next step will be recruiting an army of people to serve at that service. So we'll create lots of ways. If you're new to the church or you've been looking for a way to dive in and help and serve, there's going to be lots of need if we continue that direction, which it looks like we're going to. I'll keep you posted on that. But we want to have the exact same service on a Saturday night that we have on Sunday mornings with me preaching or whoever's preaching, worship, kids stuff, coffee, all that. So we'll need a whole bunch of people to help. So we'll continue to talk more about that, and I'll keep you posted. All right, 1 Corinthians. If you're new to First Free, we're in a series on the book of 1 Corinthians. I just preach through books of the Bible, and we've been in the book of 1 Corinthians for some time. We'll be here probably for another 3-4 months at least. And we are in 1 Corinthians 7. We finished 1 Corinthians 6 last week, and we are starting 1 Corinthians 7. And in 1 Corinthians 7, if you want a Bible, you need a Bible, you can raise your hand. Most of the scriptures today will be on the screen, but if you'd like a Bible, just raise your hand, and if you don't have one, it's a gift. You can take that with you. 1 Corinthians 7, I'm just going to read verse 1, and then we're going to pray. I'll explain it. Paul says this in 1 Corinthians 7, now for the matters you wrote about, and then he starts to address some things. So part of what 1 Corinthians is, and 2 Corinthians, and 2 other letters that Paul wrote this church that we don't have, and I've joked about that. Paul actually wrote 4 letters to the church of Corinth. We only have 2 in the Bible, and I've joked a little bit about why I think we only got 2 out of the 4. So I think in the other 2, Paul just uncorked and just probably went off and said some things because the church of Corinth was a mess. And we've talked a lot about it, and so Paul's bringing a lot of rebuke, and it's possible in those other 2 letters, Paul just uncorked, and God said, no, we're not going to put that one in there, Paul. Those 2 we're not going to put in there. That's possible, that happened. I don't really know where the other 2 are. It's just my thoughts, my ideas, my opinions. But Paul's addressing a lot of concerns. This church had a lot of questions about a lot of things, and some of it is because of the culture they had come out of. And as it pertains to things like marriage, sex outside of marriage, sex in marriage, divorce, remarriage, singleness, this church was very confused. They had a lot of questions, and you can understand why when you understand the culture of Corinth and what these guys had come out of. Very sexually immoral culture, a very perverted culture. We've talked a lot about that. Well, now they're Christians, and now they're married, or maybe they're married, but their spouse didn't become a believer. How does this work? What does this look like? Lots of questions they had, and what Paul is doing in chapter 7, I feel like he's taking a very fatherly approach to this church to answer their questions and help them with issues that aren't very easy to talk about. Next week isn't going to be any easier as we talk about divorce and remarriage and what does that look like. Not easy things to talk about. Sex outside of marriage that we talked about last week. Sex in marriage. Not easy topics to talk about, but incredibly real and incredibly relevant to all of us. So we're going to pray because we need God's help. I need God's help. I need God's grace to talk about this. I thought this morning what I would do is put this up real high and just read my notes to you like this. This is really tough, vulnerable stuff. I'm going to do my best this morning as we talk about sex and marriage. I'm going to be careful. It's a mixed audience. There's a place for the kids. I'm definitely talking to grown-ups this morning. So you know that as we dive in here. I'll do my best. I understand the audience. I'll try to keep it between the rails as best I can. I'll do my best to be as transparent as I can about my life and my marriage without making you too uncomfortable. This is tough stuff, is what I'm trying to say. My wife is in the room, so I will be held accountable for everything I say. I won't point her out, but she's in here. I asked her possibly if she could be to be in both services so everyone would know that I will be held accountable for every good and dumb thing that rolls out of my mouth. So let's pray. God, we love you and we need you, and I just ask for your help this morning. Would you give us some grace with this one? Would you just help us navigate our way? This can just be such a tender topic. Lots of husbands and wives in the room, lots of future husbands and wives in the room, and sometimes marriage is hard, and sometimes we hurt each other, and sometimes this specific topic can be very tender and just fused with emotions and pain and hurt and things from the past. And God, I recognize all of that, and I confess that in and of myself, I do not have the ability to address all the issues and all the questions about any of these topics. So Holy Spirit, would you be our teacher and our leader and our guide this morning? I submit all the study, all the hours logged, all the notes, all of it to you, and I ask that you would bring out of this time the things that you want us. Holy Spirit, you are the counselor. So would you bring the things out of this time that you want us to hear, that you want us to wrestle with? I submit it all to you, and I ask that you would have your way. Do a beautiful thing in our hearts, do a beautiful thing in our lives, and do a beautiful thing in the marriages represented in this room, I ask, for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so last week, for those of you who were here, and those of you that heard that and came back, we talked about sex outside of marriage, bad sex. And that's what sex outside of marriage is. It's bad. We talked a lot about that. We tried to answer the questions why. Why is it bad outside of marriage and the pain that it can cause? And so today we shift gears and we talk about good sex, which is sex in marriage. And that's exactly what sex in marriage is. Sex in the safety and the confines and the boundaries of marriage from God's perspective, because that's what we're looking at, God's view of sex, it's good. In fact, sex in marriage in and of itself is a good just because God made it. And the reason I say that is because too often, I'm a church history buff. If there's any other dorks like me in the room and you like to study church history, especially, and you study fundamental Christianity, then you know what I'm about to say is true. There has been historically, you go back to the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, it's where it got its roots. You study the early church fathers. There has been historically in the Christian fundamental church a very weird, negative view of sex, even sex in marriage. And I could read you quotes from some of these guys that you're like, what? This guy obviously had some issues. I mean, it's almost like if you weren't good enough or godly enough to stay single and not have sex, then go ahead and get married. And if you absolutely have to, in marriage, have sex once in a while, go ahead, but for God's sake, don't enjoy it. And you better produce a baby out of it if you're going to do it at all. It's crazy. Those ideas are out there. And maybe some of you grew up in one of those fundamental Christian homes that almost put this negative or dirty view of sex, even sex in marriage. It's crazy, it's sad, and it's tragic because sex is a gift from God given to a husband and a wife. It's to be enjoyed fully and freely in the marriage bed. The Bible is clear that it's undefiled in the marriage bed. And as Christians, we should celebrate sex in marriage. We should enjoy sex in marriage, and I believe that Christians should have the best sex lives because we have the manufacturer's guide. He made it. He's told us about it in his book. And so what we want to do today as best we can is put the fun back in fundamentalism. And we're just going to hit the ground running, okay? Verse 3. Again, some topics, there's no easy way to get into them, so we're just going to dive right in. Verse 3, we are going to talk to the husbands. We're going to start with the husbands. I think there's a reason Paul starts with the husbands. I think if a husband's doing his job right, most things will just fall into place, so I want to talk to the husbands first. I know you guys hate it when I do this, but I just want to know my audience, if it's okay with you, how many husbands do we have in the room? Let me just see your hand just for a second. How many husbands? There's a lot of husbands. Put your hands down. How many men in the room are not husbands yet, but hope or think you will be someday? You're not yet, but you think there's going to be a day you are a husband. Hold them up. Ladies, look around. We can do a mass wedding right no, just So okay, so if you're a husband, listen to me. If you're a future husband, even better. You can hear it now so your wife doesn't have to endure 3 or 4 years of pain as you're trying to figure this thing out on the front end, okay? So everybody, if you're a man, This applies to you. Okay, here's what he tells us. Verse 3. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife. We're going to start right there. This is right out of the Bible. That's what it says, right there. It's in the Bible. Okay, but what does this mean? Well, in context, it's important to understand in context, based on 1 Corinthians 6, the rest of 1 Corinthians 7, that Paul is specifically addressing a wife's sexual needs. Now, obviously, your marital duty to your wife encompasses far more than meeting her sexual needs, but it is clear in the context of what Paul is writing, this is saying husbands are to serve their wives by meeting their sexual needs. And I just want you to remember that we believe in a literal interpretation of the Bible here. So what this means is this. Your wife has sexual needs, your wife has sexual desires, and as a husband, your job is to say, yes, ma'am, reporting for duty. That's what Paul's saying. It's pretty simple. So what do for husbands? Well, we find out what our wife's needs are, and we fulfill those needs. And if you are a husband and you don't know what those needs are, those wants are, those desires are, what do you think you should do? Ask her. You just ask her. She's your wife. She's your wife. I mean, you should be able to talk about these things with your wife and communicate about these things with your wife. You need to find out what her needs are. And if you don't know, you ask her. You let her help you. Now, when we meet, the men's thing, if you saw the funny flyer they made, we're going to do a men's night, and we'll talk more about these things when we're together just as guys, because you can say things to guys, you can just talk real bluntly to guys. But if I was going to give a piece of advice to a husband or a future husband about how to have a great life of intimacy with your wife, I would simply say this: let her lead and make it all about her. Make it all about her needs. Make it all about what she wants and what she desires. See yourself as a servant to your wife. If you do that, your needs will be met just on accident. You know, the reality is a lot of Christian wives, they're just not going to volunteer these things to their husband. A lot of Christian wives don't like to talk about this stuff. There are lots of reasons. Maybe the way they grew up, or they're just shy about it, or sometimes I think they're just afraid to hurt our egos, you know, because guys like to think they know exactly what their wife needs, and they don't, and you should assume you don't. You probably don't, and a lot of times they just don't want to wound you or hurt your ego. So a lot of this really just comes down to being teachable with your wife. Talking to your wife, helping your wife be able to communicate with you what she needs. You know, the truth is, a lot of guys, really, I'm just going to try to be as blunt as I can without being making you all cringe, but a lot of husbands don't really know what their wife needs. They just don't. They think they do, but they don't. And if you're a husband, you should assume you don't. And because what this does is it leads to a lot of wives feeling unfulfilled in the marriage bed and feeling like it's all about her husband, or she thinks her husband thinks it's all about him. Countless women, I've been a pastor for 20 years. I've talked to countless wives over the years who simply don't enjoy intimacy in the marriage bed because her husband doesn't know what she needs, so they don't overly enjoy it. And again, I'm trying to be as careful as I can with what I'm saying here, but you know, this isn't really rocket science. If she enjoys it, she may want to engage in it more. Pretty simple math. So what we need to do is talk, communicate, figure it out together. And ladies, I know I've talked to lots of ladies over the years, and they say, well, my husband just doesn't listen to me. I try to talk, he just doesn't listen. That's true. A lot of guys are like that. They don't listen to a lot. I promise you, though, if this is a conversation you're willing to have with him, he will listen to you. His ADD will subside. Ask my wife. I'm like, what? I am tuned in to that conversation. He will listen to you. It's something that we need to talk about. You know, and honestly, a lot of this comes down to a husband being teachable, to a husband being humble. And as it pertains to this topic, I have found over the years that most husbands usually are pretty teachable about this topic. If their wife is willing to be courageous enough to open up and talk to her husband about these things, most husbands really are willing to listen, and they really are willing to be teachable. You know, the average husband, when you're driving, doesn't really enjoy it when you give him directions about how to drive, right? I mean, we don't usually like that, right? Does any husband like that when your wife is sitting next to you telling you how to drive? We don't usually like that. We don't usually like you directing us when we're driving. Now, directions in the bedroom, though, that's usually welcomed by all guys. You can talk to him. He needs to hear from you. This is one of those things where I've said it 1,000 times, a great marriage doesn't happen on accident. It takes work, it takes effort, it takes putting the other person's needs before yourself. Great marriages aren't going to happen on accident. Well, a great life of intimacy in a marriage doesn't happen on accident either. It takes communication, it takes patience, it takes humility, and it takes a vulnerability and a transparency for a husband and a wife to really be willing to talk and communicate about these things with each other. It takes vulnerability, and we need to do this for each other. And the reality is, for a husband to fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and for a wife to enjoy intimacy in the context of marriage, it's far more than just what happens in the bedroom. They need to feel a connection. They need to feel valued. They need to feel cherished. They need to feel respected outside of the bedroom. If her emotional needs are not being met, or if a husband is only meeting those emotional needs, getting sweet and kind to her when he wants his sexual needs met, she is not going to feel valued. She is not going to feel connected to that guy. She's going to feel used. And how do I know that? Because I read it in a book. It's called The Journal of Shane Holden. My wife has helped me so much with these things over the years. I didn't grow up with a healthy family. My dad didn't tell me anything, and what he modeled for me was polar opposite of what we're supposed to do. So I didn't have a dad to sit me down and have these conversations with me. And dads, we need to have these conversations with our sons. We need to talk about these things with our boys. But the truth is, a lot of us didn't get that. I didn't get that. And so you can consider this today if you want to, especially if you're a young man. Just consider this some fatherly advice. In 1 Corinthians 4, I skipped it, but we're going to come back to that because there's a verse in there that I really want us to focus on at some point. In 1 Corinthians 4, the Apostle Paul says to the church of Corinth, you have 10,000 guardians, but you have no fathers. And we need fathers. We need older men in our lives to help us with these things. And if we do have boys, and I have 3 of them, and my oldest son is 18, and we talk about these things, I want him to understand these things. I want to give him some advice, and we need to do this for each other. So if you're a younger man, consider this some fatherly advice. If you're an older man, consider it some brotherly advice. But I didn't get any of this help. I mean, I remember I was probably married for 5 or 6 years. I remember the weekend the light started to come on for me about this topic. My wife had gone to a retreat in the church I was pastoring at the time. They had a women's retreat. She goes on this women's retreat, and I don't even know how I found the book, how I got the book, but there was a book written by Christian sex therapist Joyce and Cliff Penner. If you don't know Joyce and Cliff Penner, they're amazing, very godly people, and I got this book, and it was all about letting your wife lead and letting your wife teach you. And I read this book, and we had probably been married for 6 or 7 years already, and I was like, I'm reading this book, and I'm just in pain. I'm like, I don't know anything. I'm an absolute idiot. My wife came back from that retreat, and I was like, I'm so sorry. And the book radically changed my view. It radically changed my perspective. It gave me a whole different concept and view on intimacy and marriage, and that it's all about her and me seeing myself as a servant to her, that it really is all about her. And it changed my perspective. And so, again, the greatest advice I think I could give to a young man who's about to be married is make sure that you see yourself as a servant to your bride. That's what we're called to be anyway as husbands. We are servant leaders. We're to love our wife like Christ loved the church. We're the head of our home, and that means that we're to be the greatest servant of all. And we need to see ourselves as servants to our wives in every arena, even this one, and be able to talk to them and communicate about these things. And I'm not going to imply to you that it's been easy for my wife to talk about these things with me, because it's not. She's quiet, and she's shy, and she blushes. I have made her talk to me about these things. I've made her because I want to know. I don't want my wife to think that it's just about me. I want to be a servant to her, but if I'm going to serve her, I need to know what her needs are in the bedroom and out of the bedroom, and so I've forced her over the years to talk about these things with me. It's not always easy, but it is worth it to love each other enough to be vulnerable with each other and have these conversations. I've learned a lot from my wife over the years, a lot. And I wish she would just be the one up here saying these things to you, but she would never do that, and if I asked her to, it wouldn't go well for me. So I'm going to speak for her just for a second and tell you some things that she has taught me, that she would say. I've learned things like this from Vicki over the years, that she wants to be, if I'm going to meet her needs, and I'm going to fulfill my marital duty to my wife, in the bedroom and out of the bedroom, I know some things from her. I've learned these things, that she wants to be valued as my equal. in conversation and in decision making. It's a big deal to my wife. That she feels loved and she feels valued when I give her my time, when I put her first, when I play games with her, like Scrabble. And I'm just her whip and pull at Scrabble. It's horrible. I'm not kidding. Every once in a great while I pull out a victory, but normally I am just her whip and pull. When we go out to eat, when we go on dates, you know what really makes my wife feel valued and cherished and connected with me is when I love our kids well. I spend time with them, give them the best of who I am. When I'm seeking God with my whole heart and I'm passionate for Him and His Word, it causes her to feel valued and cherished. When I text her during the day or call her during the day, just to let her know I'm thinking about her. When I hold her hand, when I cuddle with her, when I embrace her and touch her when it doesn't have to lead to anything else. She feels loved, she feels connected, and she feels valued. She wants to feel valued as my friend and my partner in life, not just in sex. So husbands, here's my question for you today. Do you know what your wife needs? In the bedroom and out of the bedroom. Now, if you don't know what she needs out of the bedroom to feel connected to you in the bedroom, again, what should you do? Ask her. And ladies, this conversation I've had so many times. Most of the counseling I've done over the years has been marriage counseling. Most of that counseling is about this topic in some fashion, and I've heard it so many times where the wife will say, well, he doesn't know what my needs are. He doesn't know what my needs are. And I say to her, well, have you ever told him? And she says some version of, well, I shouldn't have to tell him. He should just know. I've heard that something like, well, he doesn't know. He's a guy. He's dumb. He just doesn't know. Like, write it down for him. And I'm really sincere about this. Write it. Give him 3 things. Talk to me. Make it simple. Like 1 syllable if you can. Talk to me. Whatever it is that you need to feel emotionally connected to your husband, tell him what it is and then put it on the refrigerator so he has to see it. He's a guy. He needs help. And then if you do tell him and he actually starts to do those things, don't do that thing to him that I've seen sometimes done to a guy, where then she says, well, he's only doing that because I told him I needed it. Like, so? That's him loving you. Well, he's only doing that because he wants to have a better sex life. Probably. It's pretty motivating for a guy. I do these 5 things, it's going to make our sex life better. I'll do those 5 things. It's pretty motivating for a guy. He should want a better sex life, and so should you. And this is part of how we get there. We communicate what we need to each other so that it is better. He needs your help. He needs to know what your needs are. And husbands, if you don't know what she needs in the bedroom and out of the bedroom, then you need to ask her, communicate with her, listen to your wife, and let her help you meet her needs. Okay? Now, before I start talking to the husbands, ladies, am I in the right zip code of that stuff? Am I at least barking up the right tree? Give me something. Yeah, no, yeah. I'm at least in the right ballpark. I'm probably not completely accurate because I'm a guy, right? But I'm in the right zip code. Is that right? Yes? Okay, husbands, they're nodding their head. They're not saying it because they're ladies. They're not going to talk when they're going, yes. They're not there yet. So I'm giving you good stuff. Okay, now, let's shift gears and let's talk about the wives. Okay? How many wives in the room? Lots of wives. How many ladies aren't wives yet but want to be wives? Several. Boys, you looking? Okay. All right. So here we go. I'm going to talk to the wives now. Here's what it says to the wives. Same verse. And likewise, the wife to her husband. You know, some days I just love my job. You know, sometimes it's fun to preach the Bible. Sometimes it's really hard, but sometimes there's certain verses you're like, I just love the Bible. What does this verse mean? What does it mean when it says, likewise, the wife to your husband? That means exactly what every husband in this room is hoping it means. That's what it means. That's what it means. That wives are called to meet their husband's needs in the same way. That's just God's view of this thing. Simply put, here's what it means. We're meeting each other's needs. We're seeking to meet each other's needs. We're serving each other by meeting each other's sexual needs, wants, and desires. We're talking, we're communicating, we're negotiating. It really looks like this. Wife, whatever makes you happy. I want to meet your needs. I want to serve you. In this arena, whatever makes you happy, tell me and I want to do that. And she says, no, husband, whatever makes you happy. How can I serve you? How can I meet your needs? No, I want to meet your needs. No, I want to meet your needs. That's what this is saying, beloved. It's Philippians 2, that we're considering the other person better than ourselves. I mean, if you have a husband and a wife doing that in any arena of their marriage, whether it's the budget or the house cleaning or the bedroom, seeking to put the needs and the wants and the desires of the other person first, Christianity 101 actually applied to a marriage, you're probably going to have a pretty beautiful marriage, right? That's all this is saying. We're to consider the needs of and the wants of the other person more important than ourselves, and it goes both ways. So wives, do you know what your husband's sexual needs are? Are you seeking to meet those needs? Do you know how often your husband wants sex or needs sex? Well, you probably know what his needs are because guys aren't that complicated. So let me ask it this way. Do you care? Or do you just see it as another chore? Like, yeah, he's probably going to want sex sometime this month. Is it a gift? Do you see it as a gift that you have to give to your husband, or is it a chore that you feel like you have to endure? This is a big deal. This is a big deal. You might not like that it's such a big deal if you're a wife, but it is a big deal. Like it or not, this is the number one need in the life of most husbands. And number two, and number three. I've done this exercise with hundreds of couples. Wives, put your top 5 needs for a great marriage. Piece of paper. Don't let them see it. Husbands, do the same thing. Very rarely does sex make the top 5 for a wife. Very rarely is it not number 1 for the guy. And then he just gets stuck. Number 2, sex. Number 2. What else is there? And that's most husbands. That's just how they are. And sometimes wives don't like to hear that. It's just how men are made. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with him. It means he's a man. That's all it means. And he didn't ask to be that way. He didn't pick to be that way. A lot of guys wish they weren't that way. They think it would make their marriages a lot easier. He didn't ask to be that way. It's just how he is. And then on top of that, he married some woman that he's crazy attracted to and wants to have sex with and think he should get to because it's his wife. You're his wife. You have a duty to make sure that you're meeting his needs, just like he has a duty to make sure that he's meeting your needs. You should probably be concerned if he's not interested. And this may be a shock to some of you as wives. You know, we talk all the time about how women want to be wanted. They want to be valued and they want to be cherished. They want to be wanted by their husbands, and they do. It's in the heart of every woman. You know, your husband might not say this because he's too macho, so I'll say it for him. Husbands want to be wanted too. Husbands want to be wanted by their wives. And when they feel like they're not, or they feel like they're constantly rejected, or their wife doesn't really enjoy sex with him or want him as a man, but every once in a while she gives in, but she isn't very happy about it, and she mostly does everything she can to avoid it, it will mess your husband up. It will mess him up for sure, I promise. I mean, if your number one need on that list is talking and communicating with your husband, and he looked at you and said, we got to talk again? My gosh, didn't we talk a week ago? We got to do it again already? I talked to you a week and a half ago. Would you like that? Of course not. It's the same thing. Which leads to verse 4. We're just going verse by verse here. Here's what Paul says. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. I just got to read that one more time. The wife's body does not belong to her alone, but also to her husband. What does this mean? Exactly what it says. Wife, your body is your husband's. He's got some jurisdiction there. You might not like to hear this. It's just true. So you need to let him see it, and you need to let him enjoy it, and you need to share it with him. Did anyone know that men are very visual? Did anyone know that? Right? You know there's a reason that pornography and all that junk is such an incredibly powerful temptation for men, right? Because we're visual. Men are visual. Satan knows it. He's twisted it. He's taken advantage of it. Men are visual. So, wives, don't hide your body from your husband. That's what Paul's saying. Don't scold him for touching you. Don't make him feel like there's something wrong with him because he's sexually attracted to you. He's supposed to be. He's your husband. You know, the sad truth is the culture, I think, my opinion, has just messed a lot of women up. A lot of wives are just messed up with the way they view themselves because of the culture that we live in. So, the average woman surveyed says the number one thing that she dislikes about herself is her body, the way she looks. Number one for almost all women. So, if you're a husband, you better be treading carefully here, okay? Don't be critical. You need to be, you watch what comes out of your mouth because women have been messed up by the world they live in. They compare themselves to all the nonsense out there, all the models, all the magazines. They go to a grocery store. Every magazine women are reading has a size 1 airbrushed model on the cover, and they all think they got to look like that. They're comparing themselves to all this junk that they're seeing. Facebook is destroying people. You think whatever you want about Facebook. Facebook's messing a lot of people up. Women just put the best pictures of themselves and present the best life and all this stuff, and most of it isn't even real, but we got all these people comparing themselves to each other, and a lot of women simply hate the way they look and have a messed up self-image and self-view because of the world that they live on, because of the world they live in. And so on those rare occasions where a lot of wives do make love to their husbands, they turn the lights off as quick as they can, they get under the covers, and they make sure they do their best so that he doesn't see anything because they don't like the way they look. So they think he doesn't like the way she looks. So I want you to hear me clearly, wives. He likes the way you look. He likes your body. He really does. And because his body also belongs to you, right? Your body belongs to him. His body belongs to you. And so because his body also belongs to you, if he's giving his body to you the way he's supposed to be, he's not seeing anyone else's body because his eyes belong to you. So he's not gratifying his eyes anywhere else if he's doing his job right. Right, man? Am I right? Right. My body belongs to Vicky. You know what that means? It means I'm not looking at other women. That's what it means. And if you are a married man and you're looking at other women, stop it. Just quit it. You don't need healing and you don't need counseling. You just need to stop it today. She's all I see. So she doesn't have to have some weird sense that I'm comparing her to all the other junk out there, because I'm not. My wife and I have talked about this so many times. She's in her 40s now, and, she's had 4 kids, and, ladies, you go through that thing where you start to feel like maybe you're not what you used to be, and you've had babies, and things are shifting, and all that kind of stuff is happening to you. And I've seen it at times where she's not feeling as good, and I'm just like, you're crazy. I love the way you look. You look better to me right now than you ever have in our whole lives. And I've said it to her so many times. It's not like I have anything to compare it to, because I don't. And why would I want to? Why would you even want to be doing it? You got a real wife, like a real woman, like right there in your house and next to you. Why would you want to be gratifying your eyes somewhere else anyway? I mean, even like going through the mall, the whole Victoria's Secret thing. Do you ever go through the mall and just walk by Victoria's Secret? They got those big, giant posters of girls, and I know where it is. And when I even get near that, I'm looking the other way. The other day, it was last week, my wife and I were walking through the mall, and we walked past Victoria's Secret. Even my wife was like, holy moly, that might have been the most beautiful woman I've ever seen. And I said, what woman? I wasn't looking that direction. I was looking the other way. I said, what woman? And she's like, what woman? Right. I'm like, no, I'm not kidding. I didn't see it. I didn't look. Why? Because I don't want to. You know, that's so noble. That's so holy. No, it's just smart. Why would I want to be doing that? Like, why would I want to be looking and lusting after some woman that isn't my wife? That's just insane to me. If I'm going to look at anyone and lust after anyone, it's going to be my wife. That's absurd. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, Proverbs 5. So I want my wife, and you should, as a husband, want your wife to be your only outlet for your eyes. Your only gratification for every sexual thought and desire you have should be your wife, and that's it. And she needs to know that. And if she knows that, it's going to make it a lot easier for her to share her body with you, because she knows you're not filling your head and your eyes up with all the other junk. This is simple, but am I right, ladies? It just makes it easier for her. And then, ladies, guess what? If he's choosing to do that and you know he's sincerely trying to do that, he's only going to gratify himself and his eyes on you, then what should you do? Let him. Let him gratify his eyes there. He needs to fill them up somewhere because he's a guy and he needs to. So let him. Your body belongs to him. Let him see it and let him enjoy it. One of my favorite Proverbs is Proverbs 5. I didn't put it on here. I was just thinking about it this morning. Here's what it says. Drink water from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets or your streams of water in the public squares? Let them be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers in any way. Even with your eyes. May your fountain be blessed. May you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breasts satisfy you always. That word satisfy in the original language means to satiate, to fill, to overflowing, to be stuffed so full that you have no appetite for anything else. May you be ever captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Duh. Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? Why be filling your eyes up somewhere else? Why be looking at all that stuff? Why be giving any energy to anything or anyone that isn't your wife? She's a real person. She's right there next to you. Make her your only outlet for all of your sexual desires and gratifications. And if you do, I promise it's going to do something in your marriage. It's going to make it passionate. I've talked to so many couples over the years. Well, we just don't have any passion in our sex life anymore. You know, one of the reasons for that is because guys are looking at other things and gratifying their eyes and their desires in other places, even if it's not a full-blown sexual affair. And I know I'm just being really blunt here, but this is just real life. You know, a man's, I think about it like this. Your sex desires, your whatever you want to call it, think of that like a steam in a pot, right? And there's a top on that thing. And every time you look somewhere else, go ahead and fill your eyes up, just look at that girl for a little while, you just lift the top, let a little steam out. And then you do that little thing with the computer that you know you shouldn't do, and you're going to say sorry for it later, but you can go ahead and do it anyway. Let some out. All those things guys are doing. They're filling their eyes up, they're gratifying. So there's just not that much left. But if you leave the top on that pot, and it is only released for your wife, suddenly there's a lot more passion there. Men, our job is to make sure that we understand that our bodies belong to our wives. That includes our eyes, so we only gratify ourselves there. And wives, if your husband is really making a sincere effort to do that, it means that you're going to let him and that you're going to help him with that. Verse 5. Verse 5. He says that we are not to deprive each other. Do not deprive each other except for 3 reasons he gives. You can see them up there. We don't deprive each other of sexual fulfillment in marriage unless 3 reasons are met, 3 conditions. Number 1, mutual consent. Good luck getting that from your husband. Number 2, it's for a season. So it's agreed upon time. Number 3, it's for spiritual purposes, not selfish. Okay? Well, what about health issues? What about when baby comes? What about maybe the guy's got some health issues? I get these questions all the time. Listen, what are you supposed to do in those seasons when maybe physically it's difficult? What do you think you should do? Talk. Communicate. Make sure that you're communicating with each other and still finding ways to meet each other's sexual needs because they don't go away. Now, here's what he's saying, though. There may be seasons where you choose to abstain for purposes like prayer and fasting, or sometimes maybe you just have real issues that you have to work through. It's a spiritual matter because maybe you feel like you're enemies and you're ready to kill each other all the time. You need some counseling, and maybe sometimes in certain seasons having sex isn't going to be good, it's not going to work, and you need to work through some issues. That's all legitimate. If it's by mutual consent, it's for a season, it's for spiritual purposes, and there's an end date set. We're not to deprive each other for anything other than that. And again, I've said this before, but without a doubt, one of the biggest problems I have seen in marriages as 20 years as a pastor is sexual frustration. So let's just address this quickly. What does it mean to deprive each other in our marriage as it pertains to sexual intimacy and sexual fulfillment? Well, the word deprive means to withhold. It means to not give. It means to make someone meet up to a certain standard of behavior before you're willing to give. You're depriving unless. If they do this, if they do this, if they do this, then I'll give them this. It's depriving. The truth is, sometimes spouses do this to each other. Sometimes wives can be guilty of not meeting his needs. They're depriving him because they feel like he's not meeting their emotional needs in all the right ways. So I've seen this, I call it the circle of pain. It should be the circle of passion. I call it the circle of pain. I've seen this hundreds and hundreds of times. He says, I was just so sexually frustrated. We never have sex, and our sex life is terrible, and miserable. I said, is that true? She says, yeah. And I say, why? Well, he's not meeting my emotional needs. So here's what happens. He's not meeting her emotional needs, which is key for you if you're a husband. So that's the biggest need she has in her life. So she doesn't want to meet his sexual needs. What's the biggest need he has in his life? Well, she's not meeting his sexual needs, so he withdraws even more, and even more so doesn't want to meet her emotional needs. And then what does she do? Well, she withdraws from him even more, and she doesn't want to meet his sexual needs. What does he do? Well, he withdraws from her even more and doesn't want to meet her emotional needs. And I'm just speaking straight to you. I've a month, 6 months, a year, and they haven't been intimate. What this should be is a circle of passion where he is doing everything he can to meet her emotional needs. And if he's doing that, she usually is interested in concern of the sexual needs and wants to meet those needs, which makes him want to meet her emotional needs even more, because there is a chemical in a man's brain called vasopressin that is released when he's intimate with his wife that makes him want to be loyal and committed to her, so that's kicking. Now he wants to meet her emotional needs, and so he's even doing more of that, which makes her more sensitive to his sexual needs, which makes him more sensitive to her emotional needs, which makes him more sensitive to his sexual needs. And it should be this big, beautiful passion of circle that too often is turned into a passion of pain because we're simply not meeting each other's needs. And then the question comes up, well, who should go first? Should I start meeting his sexual needs, or should he start meeting my emotional needs? I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. Who's right, who's wrong? Does it even matter? You know what the question is who's going to be like Jesus? Not who's right, be right. Be right all day long. Win. Go ahead and win. Is it going to help? Who's right, who's wrong? Who cares? Who is going to be like Jesus and start putting the needs and the wants of the other person first? That's ultimately what it comes down to. Sometimes we deprive each other because of an offense. Someone did something and we haven't forgiven them, so we deprive each other because of an offense that we haven't worked through. All of these things are just incredibly non-Christian, right? Sometimes it's because we see sex as dirty, or because of the way we grew up, because of bad teaching, so we deprive each other. Or we got past pain that we've brought into our relationship, and we talked about that last week. If your past issues are affecting the present marriage bed, then you have an obligation to your spouse to get healing and counseling and work through those things, because it's not fair to your spouse if your past sexual life before marriage is somehow negatively impacting the marriage bed. You need to work through those things. It's not fair to your spouse, and I shared a little bit about that last time. Sometimes we deprive each other simply because we just don't make time for it. This one's incredibly practical. Sometimes we're just too tired, especially when you're in the thick of it, 2 jobs and a bunch of little kids, and we just don't make time for it. So we're depriving each other because we're just too tired, and our schedules are too full, and that happens a lot. So here's what you should do if that's the case. Schedule it. And I know that people are like, that doesn't sound romantic. Just put it. We schedule far lesser things. Just put it on the calendar. Agree on how many times a week, put it on the calendar, and then just make it happen. It matters. It is a big deal. And again, I'm talking honestly here. I've talked to many men over the years who feel like their wives have time and energy for everything except them. They just feel like that. All she wanted to do is be a mom, and now she is one, and that's what the guy feels like. He wanted a wife. And she's got time for her job, and she's got time for her church, and she's got time for the kids, and she gives the best of who she is to her church and her job and her kids. She's got time for all these other things. She's even got time for Facebook until 11 o'clock at night. She can do all that and give the best of who she is to everyone else, and then it's 11 o'clock, 11:30, she's finally done with Facebook. These are real conversations I've had with real live people, even here in this church. Her head hits the pillow, and she's just too tired for me. A lot of guys feel like that, and it messes a guy up. He needs to know that you care as much about his sexual needs as you need to know that he cares about your emotional needs. So you do what you got to do. You schedule it, or whatever you got to do. Sometimes husbands are guilty of depriving their wives by being consumed with lust, pornography, and that which comes with it, or simply by using her as an object. Okay? We are not to deprive each other. That's what it says. Now, if you are wanting, you find yourselves in your marriage, and maybe you're there right now, and you're wanting to deprive the other person because of one of those things I just read or something I didn't read, but you're in a place and it's real. You're sitting next to your husband right now, and you're wanting to deprive him. You're not wanting to give yourself to him. Or you're sitting next to your wife right now, and you're wanting to deprive her, or you're not wanting to meet her needs in this way. If you're in a place like that, what do you think you should do? Tell them. Talk. Again, so much of this is just about communication. Have a real conversation about why that is, and then fix it. That's what we're called by God to do in the context of our marriages. It means husbands are asking their wives what would help them be more excited about intimacy in marriage. And it means wives are telling their husbands, whatever that is, hold my hand, even when it won't lead anywhere, do the dishes, clean the bathroom. Let me know you care about my life. Be my friend. Spend time with me. Cherish me. Make me feel wanted and beautiful even when it doesn't have to end with sex. Cuddle with me at night when we're falling. You know, ladies like to cuddle. Do you know that? They just like to cuddle sometimes. And when you're falling asleep, they just like to cuddle. My wife loves to cuddle. And, your arm falls asleep and all that is really hard. My wife loves to cuddle. So cuddle with your wife. Even when it doesn't have to go any further than cuddling with her. And wives, tell him these things. Tell him what your needs are. And husbands, seek to meet them. Again, I'm just going to say this real plainly. Too many men are just selfish in the bedroom. Happy to let their wives know what their needs are and quick to ask her to meet those needs. You know, I got to be real careful how I say this part, but there's even a basic math problem as it pertains to the needs that husbands and wives have sexually. How do I say this in the right way? How do I say this without getting fired tomorrow? Let's say it this way. The average man can reach the finish line in about 2 minutes. You know what I mean by that? That's speaking in code. That's what the experts tell us. This is just physical science. You took health class, right? Well, the average woman, it's like 4 to 6 minutes. That's a basic math problem, right? Right? I mean, 2 minutes for him, 4 to 6 for her. Okay. Guys get mad. Why would God make us like that? I think he did it on purpose. Because it means that you can't be selfish. It means that if she's going to be satisfied too, you've got to talk to her and communicate with her and make sure that her needs are coming before your own. That's really what this stuff comes down to for us as husbands. And you're communicating about those things and talking about those things. It also means wives are asking their husbands about their level of need and how many times he does need to do this. This is very different for husbands and wives, right? I'm sure you weren't aware of this. But sometimes husbands are more interested in sex than wives. Anybody know that? I've heard about that. I've heard that can be sometimes true. Now, in a very rare case, it's flipped around. Very rare, but in a very rare case, it's flipped around where the wife is more interested in sex than the husband. And if you are one of those men who's married to one of those women, I think I can speak for all of the other husbands in this room when I say this to you. We hate you. It's physiological for a man. It's not for a woman. It's a physical need for your husband. It's not for you. It's physical. After 4 or 5 days, that guy's in pain. I don't know how else to say it. It's a physical reality for a man. It's emotional for a woman. But you need to have these conversations and talk about what that is and agree on those things and what does that look like and ask him about it and then agree on what's enough and seek to honor each other in that. Now, I'm not saying that means you need to head to the bedroom every time your husband has a need or desire. I'm not saying that. You'd probably be very busy. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there needs to be real communication around this issue, and you're both seeing your bodies as belonging to the other person and understanding that it's not okay to deprive each other. And this might surprise women, because this is such an emotional topic for women. Do you know that your husband feels more emotionally connected to you during sexual intimacy than any other time? He really does. And that's one of the reasons it's so powerful for a husband in marriage. Women aren't like that. But your husband feels more emotionally connected to you during that time than any other time. Okay, what else? Now, let me say this too, though. Let me say this. Oh my gosh. If you are married to someone who is abusing you sexually, if you are abusing your spouse sexually, stop it. And I'm sincere about that. Make an appointment, come in for counseling, you need help. And I'm really sincere about that. It's not okay in the marriage bed. This does not mean that you're to allow it. See, here's what he says. He says that we're supposed to not deprive each other. Nowhere in here does he say it's okay to demand it from each other. And definitely nowhere in here is he saying that you should allow someone to abuse you. If your spouse is ever asking you to do anything that violates your conscience or your morals or is sinful, you're not supposed to just go with it because your body doesn't belong to you. If husbands are using that on their wives, they need to stop it. It's not okay. We're supposed to honor them, serve them, meet each other's needs in a way that is agreeable and pleasing to both partners and to God. A question I get a lot of questions that I can't address in this audience. But a question I've heard many times over the years from couples is, well, what can we do, what can't we do in the marriage bed? Outside of marriage, nothing. Inside of marriage, go for it, right, is what I say. Now, there's some caveats with that, right? It has to be agreeable to God and His Word, so you can't be bringing anything that would be sinful, immoral, lust-filled, pornographic, any of that nonsense. No place for that in the marriage bed, none of that stuff. It has to be agreeable to both partners and not harmful or painful in any way. It has to be good and honoring to both partners and something both partners are comfortable with. Outside of that, it is fair game, but you need to communicate with each other about these things. And you can't be asking your spouse to do things that make them uncomfortable. That's not what it says when it says that our wives don't, or her body doesn't belong to her, but it belongs to me. It doesn't mean that you're manipulating her to do things that she doesn't want to do. Does that make sense? Please don't do that. That's dishonoring to your wife, okay? Does sex have to just be for procreation? What do you guys think? Man, I sure hope not. I'm going to say no for lots of reasons. Now, I know some people believe that. There's whole denominations that believe sex should just be for procreation and birth control is a sin. And so they try to get around that by using things like the rhythm method, which usually means on rhythm they have a kid once a year. But I don't think, the Bible doesn't address it. I don't think sex in marriage has to just be for procreation for lots of reasons, but for the sake of time, I'll just give you a few. One is the idea that what we're going to talk about next, if we have time here, is about being single, that you can choose a life of singleness if you want to be more devoted to God. I mean, Paul makes that clear. Well, if you can choose a life of singleness, you can be more devoted to God because you want to have a lifestyle that's going to be conducive for kids. You can certainly choose how many kids you want to have in marriage if you want to be able to give yourself to the things of God. And there's lots I could say about that. And I know the other side is you should just have as many kids as you possibly can because you may be having the next Billy Graham and all that kind of stuff. And I understand all of that. But there's also a certain level of desire that some people feel to fulfill their own specific calls that I believe it's very legitimate. Paul knew his call was not conducive for a family. So we need to recognize this so that we don't think that we have to get married, have as many kids as possible, and then head off and give ourselves to God and God's work and ignore our kids. Your family becomes God's work when you have children. Not the secondary calling, but the primary calling. These are legitimate things to consider. Just like it's okay to say, I want to be single, it's okay to agree with your spouse that we're going to have 2 kids, we're going to have 4 kids. It's between you, your spouse, and God, and sex after that is not somehow unholy. It's clear to me from these few verses in this chapter and from Genesis to Revelation. It's also about oneness in the marriage bed. Adam lay with his wife Eve and he knew her, it says. It's about intimacy. It's about knowing each other. And as I said, husbands feel more intimate and more connected with their wife during that activity than any other activity. They are highly emotional, and it's one of the reasons that sex is so powerful for a man. Again, that vasopressin, it gets released in his brain, and he feels deeply connected to his wife. So it's just for oneness. It's for intimacy. It's for sharing something with each other that you can't share with anyone else. It's also for comfort. You can read that for yourself in 2 Samuel chapter 12. David and Bathsheba had a baby. The baby died. It says David went to her to comfort her, and he lay with her. Sometimes it's just for comfort. You're going through difficult times in your lives. You don't know what to do for each other. You can give yourself to each other to comfort each other. This is in the Bible. It's just for plain old fun. It's like oil on a relationship. I'm not saying that a healthy sex life will... Whoa! God agrees. I'm not saying a sexy health... a sexy health life. Can you delete that from them? Can you edit that for me? I'm not saying a healthy sex life will make for a great marriage, but it will definitely help. It's also for protection. Verse 5. Let's look at verse 5. He says, do not deprive each other except for mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. So one of the main reasons for this in marriage, and one of the main reasons for us not depriving each other in marriage, is for our protection. 1 Corinthians 13, the great love chapter, says love always protects. So our goal as husbands should be that our wives feel so loved and so cherished and so honored and so valued and so sexually fulfilled and so romanced and so emotionally satisfied that they are not vulnerable to other guys. That's just what it means. And the truth is, there's a lot of good, sincere Christian women who are neglected in those ways by their husbands, and they become vulnerable. If they get emotionally empty, they're not feeling loved, they're not feeling cherished, they're not feeling wanted, they're not feeling valued. The right guy comes along, says the right things. She starts to feel wanted again and desired again. She starts to feel beautiful and valued again. Something comes alive in her that's been dead for way too long, and she finds herself developing some emotional attachment that leads to an emotional affair that can lead to far more. And I've seen this with good, sincere Christian women. Now, I'm not justifying her sin. I'm not. That's not right. We can't say, well, they weren't meeting my needs, so I went and sinned. I'm not justifying anybody's sin. I'm saying our duty as husbands is to protect her from feeling that vulnerability. I want my wife stuffed full with my love so there's no appetite left for some guy coming along saying the right things to her. And it goes for wives as well. We live in this insane, sexually supercharged culture, right? Where at the click of a button, men can gratify their eyes, and where so many women in today's world are into casual sex. It's just the world that we live in. So wives just seek to protect their husbands, to have him so satisfied at home that he's just not vulnerable. When a man feels like his wife is not interested in the deepest need that he has, it makes it harder for him. When he feels like his wife doesn't want him, isn't attracted to him, doesn't desire him, when she rejects him or sexually avoids him, he becomes vulnerable. He just does. I'm not justifying his sin. I'm just saying a passionate, vibrant sex life protects him. It just too often we take this sinful, selfish posture as believers that says something to this effect. Well, Jesus should just be enough for my spouse. They're Christians. They should never commit adultery. So I don't have to meet their needs because they're just Christians and they should be okay and they should be good enough and they should be godly enough. And so we think we can neglect them. The stats tell us something different. Adultery and affairs are happening just as much in the church as out of it. Beloved, the idea that they love Jesus so I can neglect them, that's just mean and godless. There may be times we agree to abstain, but then we come together again, Paul says, and we live a lifestyle of meeting each other's needs so Satan doesn't tempt us due to our lack of self-control. Neglecting your sex life is opening a door for Satan. Going to bed every night a little angry and unfulfilled with a space between you, having your backs to each other, is just making room for the enemy in your marriage. This is our way of affair-proofing our marriage. That's what this is. Well, what about the unmarried? What about people who have not yet been married? Paul says a lot to the unmarried. And I wanted to, today, talk to the unmarried because, you didn't want all the single people to hear all this stuff about sex and intimacy and marriage and then be left hanging. Because Paul's got a lot that he says to you about the beauty of the single life. But because it's already 9:52, I'm not even going to begin to address it. So, if you're single and you want to know about your life, you'll need to come back next week and we're going to talk all about it. All right, I'm going to ask Ashley to come back out. And we got a little time, so I want us to just take a little time in prayer and response. Just like actually to ask everyone to stand, please, in response. And if you are with your spouse, I want you to grab their hand right now, even if you don't want to. God, there's 1,000 things that we didn't talk about today that we could have. And it's very possible that a lot of people have questions about their own relationships right now that weren't addressed. It's also possible that I just pulled some Band-Aids off of some wounds that people have in their marriage or from their past or whatever. It's possible there's people in this room hearing what God says about sex and marriage. or they're watching on YouTube, or listening on iTunes, or they're sitting upstairs in the video cafe, and they just know that their marriage isn't that. It's possible there's some people just stinging a little bit even, thinking about how they treat their spouse as it pertains to sexual intimacy. It's possible there's some husbands hearing this today and they're realizing that they're kind of selfish. They don't really know what their wife needs. And they haven't really asked her. Maybe they're feeling like they're not really meeting her needs outside of the bedroom. And they're feeling today like, wow, maybe I've been kind of taking advantage of her, using her. That's really possible in a room this size. That stuff's going on inside of some men right now. Maybe there's some husbands that know that they've been gratifying their eyes in other places. Maybe there's some single guys that needed to hear this, and they're thinking, man, I gotta get this stuff right before I get married. I pray for the men. Pray for husbands and future husbands. We want to be the kind of men that you want us to be, the kind of husbands that value your daughters and treat your daughters like you'd want us to. And so I pray for men, husbands, today that maybe just need to get some things right, maybe just need to have a conversation with their wife, maybe you need to ask for forgiveness. I pray that you give them the grace to do that. I pray that people wouldn't leave here beat up or shamed or condemned, but that people would leave here feeling hope. I pray for wives who maybe were hearing this today and seeing what you said about this God and thinking, man, I guess I don't really think about his needs like that. I haven't really seen my body as belonging to him. I haven't been that concerned about his needs. And I specifically pray for women who have been hurt in their past, and it's affecting their marriage. I pray for healing for them. God, more than anything, I pray that you would give us grace today to be able to communicate about this topic. To just really talk and to just do what your word says. And to seek to meet each other's needs, to honor each other and to value each other, and to recognize that this is a really, really, really big deal in our marriages, and that you've given us sex to enjoy together as husbands and wives, and to celebrate together with as husbands and wives, and to be intimate with together as husbands and wives, and it's supposed to be beautiful. So would you give us grace, God, to have those conversations if that's not what it is? As we stand here in your presence, I pray even right now, as husbands and wives are holding hands, that you would join them together even closer. And I pray for hard hearts to be softened. Maybe there's a husband and a wife that, even though I said hold hands, even if you didn't want to, they still didn't. Because they're just ready to check out on this had enough. I pray that you would soften hard hearts today. I pray that you would bring grace for wives to forgive their husbands, for husbands to forgive their wives. And I pray for protection for our marriages, God. Oh, God, I know it's just got to break your heart when you see those of us who call ourselves Christians having such difficult marriages and checking out on each other the same way the world is. So I pray for this church. I pray for us right here at First Free Church. I pray that it'd be different here, God. I pray that you would do a beautiful, beautiful thing in marriages in this church. And I pray as we go forward in this new year and we do this men's thing and we do this marriage conference and we start marriage classes, God, I ask and we agree together in this room that you would teach us as a church how to have long-lasting, beautiful marriages. And I pray for people that are without hope in their marriage. God, that today they be filled with hope. That there is help, that there is healing. And I just want to say this again as we're in an attitude of prayer. If you are in a difficult situation and you just know you need to talk to someone, I want to encourage you to call us. Jimmy Bamberg is one of our pastors. He gives himself to meeting with people and meeting with couples. Call him, make an appointment. We have a couple different professional Christian counselors that we can direct you to help you if you need more than we as pastors can give you. So that's what we're here for. We want to help you. I'm encouraging you. If your marriage is in a difficult place and you feel like you need help, let us help you. So God, thank you. Thank you for your word, and thank you that you're a good father and that you give us practical advice for our lives and our marriages. And I pray a blessing on every marriage. I pray a blessing on every marriage represented here. I pray a blessing on our lives of intimacy. And I pray today would be a fresh start for a lot of couples and the beginning of a lot of new, healthy conversations. In Jesus' name. And all God's people said, amen. Amen. God bless you guys. We'll see you tomorrow night.